My name is Kevin Galalae, and I'm the person who uncovered the program of population control, exposed it in all its details, and have lobbied governments and organizations as well as the UN system to change the program from covert to overt methods of population control. In other words, to abandon the biological and chemical methods of mass poisoning and to adapt legislative means instead.
Well, hang on a minute, because poisoning, that sounds a bit extreme. In what way are we being poisoned? That worries me to hear that, if it's true.
Yes, it is indeed true, and it is now a proven fact because all we need to do is look at ECHA's list of substances of very high concern, ECHA being the European Chemicals Agency, partly due to my work and the work of other activists and scientists as well. They have identified over 300 endocrine disruptors, which is the code word for depopulation poisons, that are present in our food system, in our beverages, in our consumer and cosmetic products.
Now, can you just explain what an endocrine disruptor does?
First of all, it aims at subverting fertility and immunity, because that is how you control population growth. You control it at both ends of life by limiting births and managing deaths. In order to limit births, you have to subvert the reproductive system, and they do these through these endocrine disruptors. And as well, in order to manage deaths, you have to subvert the immune system. And in the last phase of the demographic transition, or the depopulation program, governments need to subvert immunity because they have lopsided population pyramids. They have too many old people having subverted fertility for decades, and the population structures are unsustainable.
Now, how do you find out if you're buying a product if it's got an endocrine disruptor in the ingredients? Is there anywhere that it talks about products that might actually have that effect?
Yes, and you have to mind not only what is in the product. So not only do you have to look at the label to read the label. And you quite easily can identify these endocrine disruptors, because all you have to do is compare these the items list with ECHA's list of substances of very high concern. But you also have to mind the packaging material, because many of these endocrine disruptors leach into the food from the packaging. So, for instance, all foods packaged in plastic are contaminated with bisphenols, which is a very nasty endocrine disruptor.
So tell us about your book.
Well, I have written 10 on this subject, and they cover every aspect of the depopulation program. Some of them deal with the history, such as Killing Us Softly. Then I have a book that deals with scientific evidence, such as Peace Without Poison. And the others cover virtually every aspect of the depopulation and globalization program, because this is a dual program. The international system revolves around this axis of covert depopulation and coerced globalization.
Okay,
these are the grand objectives.
What's the motive? Other than obviously to reduce the population, why? Why do we need to do that? Surely there is actually enough food to go around, enough resources to go around for everybody on Earth.
The population in a natural state would double every 20 to 30 years. We cannot survive the next doubling from 7 billion to 14 billion, which would happen in 20 to 30 years. And had they not started to subvert fertility in 1945, we would already be a collapsed civilization. We would have long exceeded 10 billion, which is considered to be the absolute maximum number of people the Earth can feed, and not even sustainably. So we may be able to feed 10 billion people for a number of years or decades, but not sustainably. We would do it at the cost of all planetary boundaries. We would destroy nature.
Okay, so you've talked about the poison in our foods, which is rather worrying. At least we can check this out, against a list of various chemicals. But what are the other methods?
Some of the other methods are vaccines, for instance, which nowadays constitute the new front of the depopulation genocide. Why? having identified these endocrine disruptors as depopulation poisons, we have forced governments to begin the process of taking them out of the system. So they are reforming the chemical environment, but they're attempting now to substitute these covert chemical methods of depopulation with mandatory vaccination programs. So in other words, with biological methods of depopulation, which is why vaccines are being mandated right, left, and center.
Well, I know in the United States, there's something like 55 vaccines supposed to be injected into every child before the age of 5. I don't think most other countries are quite as excessive, but that does seem like a lot.
Yes, in fact, the United States has 75 vaccines. Canada is almost there as well.
That was, last time I looked was a few years ago. I mean, so, yes. Okay, so vaccines, we've got poisons in our food and poisons leaching into our food from the packaging. What else?
We have GMOs, for instance, which have built-in mechanisms of undermining our fertility and immunity. So, in other words, scientists have designed these GMOs to produce enzymes that are destructive either to our reproductive system or to the immune system. And this is, again, a method that is used throughout the world. It is particularly relevant for the developing world because countries in the developing world cannot pay for this program. This program of controlling population growth is extremely expensive, and Western nations, the wealthy nations, no longer want to foot the bill. Then we have a series of psychosocial and economic methods of controlling population growth. For instance, delaying entry into the workforce, extending the education process and demanding all kinds of unnecessary credentials, forcing women into the workforce, which is now a method that the United Nations is attempting to apply throughout the developing world. Because once you push women to the workforce, what happens is that they do not have time for childbearing.
Well, hang on, because women are they're being given the choice of maybe applying for jobs and getting jobs and equal pay and this sort of thing. They're not actually being forced, are they?
Well, it depends how you look at it. There's certainly a concerted effort to shatter, if you want, the social arrangements of countries in the developing world. This has already been done in the developed world. Women in the workforce is nothing new here. But for the developing world, this is a social shift of unprecedented proportions. And of course, it comes at a very bad time because jobs are already few and far between due to robotization and mechanization and digitization. So bringing 2 billion, 3 billion women into the workforce at this time further suppress wages and would further put pressures on family incomes, forcing therefore both men and women to work in order to sustain a family, which was not the case before. And these are intended strategies for controlling population growth. If you force women to compete for jobs and to spend their time satisfying the job market, obviously they have very little time or no time at all for childbearing.
So, any other methods? I mean, they're starting to mount up. We've got quite a few now, 5 or so.
Yes, we do. Wi-Fi radiation is also considered to be a dangerous new potential method of population control, although the evidence is scarce. Then there are a series of new technologies that are being tried now. 1 second. I'm just trying to find my notes here. Yes. For instance, every new scientific discovery, it is being potentially used for abuse by the depopulation lobby. You have, for instance, now food fortification, which is being used in the developing world. Then you have the adulteration of medical treatments, for instance, for malaria with artemisinin, which is a known sterilizant. So they use any kind of disease as a front for subverting fertility or immunity, or both. So, in other words, medicine and public health have been turned into handmaidens of genocide because governments need a pretext to get into our bloodstreams, to get into our bodies, in order to deliver these poisons, either directly or indirectly through the basic elements of life, or directly through vaccines, for instance. These are basically the methods that are currently in use.
Okay, so, but people probably, I mean, I won't be the first one to say this, I'm sure. Surely some people think that you're just paranoid.
Yes, well, people who do not have the facts may very well think that, and indeed this program has such frightening proportions because it is global, and such ambitious objectives because it has all of us at the receiving end, that one can very well be frightened. One should be frightened because none of us escapes this program. We're all at the receiving end. And unless we understand it, we cannot change it. So China, for instance, is proceeding the proper way, the legal way, by legislating limits to the family. And this is what will have to happen in the West as well. Here, however, a variety of structural obstacles stood in the place of legislation. But now that we see the damage done to our health and to our genetic and intellectual endowment being worse and worse from every generation, subjected to these covert chemical and biological methods of depopulation, now is the time to force this program to come out into the open and to legislate limits to the family size. This would have to happen sooner or later, anyhow, because the planet simply cannot support a doubling of the human population in perpetuity. As I said, we cannot survive the next doubling from 7 billion to 14 billion, and that is indeed something to be very, very frightened about, because if society collapses, if human civilization collapses, then we take down the entire Earth with us, and none of us will survive into the future.
But there's also a lot of people that say that the problem is not with overpopulation. It's just that the resources are just being controlled by a tiny elite who are just simply not sharing the Earth's resources around, the food around the world. No, that is not the case. The population doubling every 20 to 30 years, society is always attempting to stay ahead of the population growth to satisfy the food demand and the building of infrastructure. This has been an ongoing struggle. And now that we have reached the limits of the planet and we have no new continents to discover, it was high time in 1945 to begin this program. This is when this program of population control as an international system began, when the United Nations was formed. Okay, so can you just remind us about your books, what the titles are and where people can get hold of them?
They can be purchased through Amazon, for instance. So you can go to your local bookstore and ask for them, or purchase them directly from Amazon. The most important ones, I would think, are Killing Us Softly, Peace Without Poison, Survival or Extinction. These three, I would say, are absolute must-read for everybody in order to understand this program, because we are all at the receiving end. So none of us can survive into the future unless we take proactive measures now. If they shut down our reproductive system, we will have no children. Already, that is the predicament of a quarter of the population of the Western world. And with the new generation, for instance, in some countries such as Japan, which was among the first to be subjected to this program, already 40 to 50% of the population is not only incapable of reproduction, it is asexual.
Finally, Kevin, why should we believe you? What are your credentials?
Well, my credentials are that the facts that I have assembled speak for themselves. I have dealt with this for the past 8 years. I am the only recognized expert in this field outside of the system. Those who are within the system obviously do not whisper a word about it, and for obvious reasons.
And is there going to be any success, do you think, with actually lobbying to make this an overt rather than a covert program?
Yes, it is inevitable. That is inevitable, and we will have a global replacement level fertility law within 5 years, is my guess, at most 10 years.
Okay, Kevin Galalae, I hope I pronounced that right. Thanks very much for joining us on Dialect.
Thank you.
That's all for this week. Dialect's Bristol's first weekly MP3 podcast. You can download it to listen on your phone or in the car. And subscribe and listen the week before broadcast, if you like, at dialectradio.co.uk. Thanks to our guests, Mike Zeidler from Happy City, Rick Margetts talking about asbestos in Bristol and New York on 9/11, and Kevin Galalae, you just heard there. Also to studio engineer Dave Bazanko. Dialect's a Bristol Broadband Co-op production. Catch us on Bristol Community FM 93.2 every Tuesday at noon, and anyone can contribute. Contact us through the People's Republic of Stokes Croft, just off Jamaica Street, 0117 909 6897. They're online at prsc.org.uk. You can volunteer with us or for hundreds of opportunities elsewhere in Britain via the national volunteering website do-it.org. That was Dialect, and I'm Tony Gosling, wishing you a very good week. Thanks for listening. Till the same time next week. Goodbye for now.
This is Radio Freedom.